open classrooms where Professor Jamal Dajani, many of the students are here in his class, Introduction to Arab and Muslim Communities, and my classes online are coming together. And this is part of Black Palestinian Solidarities. On February 15th at the Freedom Archives in the Mission, we collaborated with the Freedom Archives and with the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, and we had a panel discussion about specifically a statement that was published 50 years ago in the New York Times on November 1st that expressed Black solidarity with Palestine. And I will share my copy. You need to send it back to me, please.
No, it just restarted.
It's restarted? Okay. I mean, you know, this is supposed to be ATU, academic technology, so I don't know where is the money San Francisco State is raising day in and day out going, but anyway, it's classroom. In any case, so we had the discussion, and also we were also very honored to have Nesbeth Crutchfield, who's sitting over there to my right, not politically, but geographically. And Nesbeth is one of the leaders of the Black Student Union Third World Liberation Front in 1968, and also has been very much involved in the struggle around San Francisco State, around Venceremos Brigade, around multiple struggles in the area. So we're really happy to have her. Joining us today is Emery Douglas. Emery Douglas is, you were Minister of Culture, right? I made a mistake of saying information. Jaime, corrected me. That Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party, arts editor for the newsletter. We were actually trying to show some slides about various things, including the most recent slide that Emery has done, not the most, one of the, you did after the delegation, and Emery anniversary of the statement, which was really, really important, and you will see it when you go around who signed it. You look at the names. I actually highlighted not only the names, but also the positions of the people, including, for example, Malcolm X's sister, Ella Collins, Robert F. Williams, Grace, and James Lee Boggs. I mean, it was, and of course, I mentioned Phil. It's so we're going to go throughout the year. We're going to be talking about that. The other thing that we thought it would be really, really important, not only to talk about Black Palestinian solidarity from Black and spokespeople here in the U.S., but also think about what is happening with the Afro-Palestinian community. Very few people know about the Afro-Palestinian community. When I was researching this, I'm actually doing a lot of research on Fatima Bernawi, who Ali Jadda mentioned. She was the first Palestinian woman to be imprisoned after 1967. She came from the Afro-Palestinian community. She became, in 1967, and then really hope people would want to learn more about it, research, and share with you what we are doing. As I said, this is for me, it's very important to be able to bring Fatima Bernawi and let people know about who she was and so on, because rarely, although 2 weeks ago, Berkeley students, they actually had her name up when they had the pictures of Palestinian women and so on. So Fatima Bernawi picture was there, because she's very well known in Palestinian history. It's not, she's in other spaces and so on. So it's really important for us as we engage in knowledge and justice-centered knowledge production to be able to think about the multiple ways that we connect with each other, not in a superficial way that we can just send statements of solidarity to each other and so on, but to actually, there are a lot of links that are deep, that exist for a very long time, and that we really need to bring out and speak about. So this is what we're going to do today. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jamal, and you're going to be our esteemed panelists respond. Okay? So, yes. Jamal.
Yeah, I'm not going to take a lot of time because I actually want to have our panelists basically do most of the talking. My family goes back historically to Jerusalem, probably on my father's side before Jesus Christ, and this is not an exaggeration. We can actually trace our history to 1,200 years ago on my dad's side. That's documented on our family tree. And on my mother's side, and this is important, kind of connects with the film, with Ali Jadda. My mother's side lived in the Moroccan quarter, so they came from northern Africa after they were driven out of Spain after the fall, basically, of Andalusia in the 16th century, and this is why it's called the Moroccan Quarter. There's a confusion about the area that is the old Moroccan Quarter and the Sharaf neighborhood, which is now referred to as the Jewish Quarter. In fact, the Jewish Quarter did not exist historically. The Jewish Quarter came after the foundation of the Moroccan Quarter because Jews, just like Arabs who were driven out of Spain, came together and settled in Jerusalem. So this is where now, and some of the pictures that were shown earlier in the film shows you that there were more than basically 300 homes were destroyed going back to about the Mamluks period. They were destroyed to make that plaza that now you all see on television, showing you the Wailing Wall. The distance where the original Wailing Wall is, there was a road of approximately the width of, less than the width of this room, where it kind of took you from the Armenian Quarter, it took you from where my dad's side is from, Nabi Dahoud Quarter, all the way through Harat al-Sharaf and the Moroccan Quarter. So it was just a passageway, and in 1967, Israel basically destroyed, we call it Harat al-Magharbi, which is the Moroccan Quarter, basically destroyed more than 300 structures, displacing 600 Palestinian families, including my mother's family, out of that whole area to create that plaza that we all see on TV, that as if it existed there for hundreds of years, right? So it's very important. Now, going to Ali Jeddah, I know Ali Jeddah personally, and he mentions briefly Collège de Frères, where he went to a French Catholic school. He was actually a classmate of my older brother, Kamel. So they went to school together before he got arrested. And then I got to know him later on when he was released, and he was known for our community as a hero, as someone who fought in the struggle, including all the, now currently there's about 300 to 350, I don't like the term Afro-Palestinian, even though I hear it, even though I did, because to me I never grew up with this terminology. I grew up with the terminology as a Palestinian. There was no, because if you come to Jerusalem, like I told you, my history on my dad's side and other parts of the family, we go before we predate Jesus Christ. And then on my mother's side, we came from Northern Africa and from Andalusia. We came back to the Moroccan Quarter, and then you meet a lot of families like who came with Salah ad-Din Ayyubi, that for example, a Kurd family or Kurdiya, who are Kurds. You never say to them that they are Kurds. I mean, even though their names Kurdiya or Kurd, they are Palestinians. So this kind of labeling people in a way, it's not how we look at it. This is not how I grew. You know, and that's why when he showed clearly, only until he crossed to the now quarter that is occupied by Jewish settlers, he was to refer to with the N-word. I mean, this is never existed in our vocabulary. This is something that is new, basically. So, talking about their struggles are not different than the Palestinian struggles, except now they've added that extra layer of races based according to the color of your skin. But for them, for example, for a very small community which lives by Bab el-Din, that's the area which is adjacent to the Moroccan Quarter, the other community from his community exists in Jericho, which is now in the West Bank, technically under Palestinian control. So for them to even expand, Israel made it so difficult for them to even expand, in a way, grow their community, because if someone from Jerusalem, from the Jeddah family, marries someone in Jericho, then he will lose his identity, he or she will lose her Jerusalem identity card. So there is also that part of that whole ethnic cleansing that Israel practices to try to empty out basically Jerusalem from its indigenous population. Now just quickly about this, Israel has what they call, and this is before you hear about the so-called deal of the century and what Trump is doing, not done. This has been going on. This is a systematic thing. They have a plan called the 30 to 70% plan. This is on their books. They've been working on it, and it's basically the displacement of the indigenous Palestinians to maintain their numbers under 30% of the population of Jerusalem, to maintain that control. So that's how they have been dealing with people from Jerusalem, whether they're from the African quarter, whether they're from the Moroccan quarter or other quarters, is going to replace them by new illegal colonial settlers.
Thank you, Jamal. And we will have the panelists speak, and then we are going to open it up to you, and we will go back and forth. So each person will make a short intervention. I just wanted to add that part of the reason actually now there is a naming Afro-Palestinian community is because there is all of the stuff that's going on in Jerusalem, that the communities in Jerusalem are being very impoverished by the Israeli policies and so on. So now the group created a center called Afro-Palestinian Community Center in the old city of Jerusalem, which is only a few feet away from the Aqsa Mosque. And it is in the African quarters that's in the Afro-Palestinian community that nobody can actually remove them away from it. And big part, and center that was created recently, not long ago, actually builds on a very long time Sudan club that existed. Many people of the members of the Afro-Palestinian community came. Some came, as Ali mentioned, in the 7th century, along with Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second Caliph in Islam. But many people also came throughout. When there were crusader attacks against Jerusalem, many of the African Muslims came from Africa and actually came to fight, along with other Muslims, against the Crusades, European Crusades. Many people came also in the 30s, during when they were going to do the Hajj, the pilgrimage in Mecca. They stopped because Jerusalem is the second holiest place in Islam. They stopped and they actually made Palestine their home and so on. So when we think today of African diaspora, it's also a question of what do we think about that? How do we think about diaspora, not diaspora? Is this part of people from the community, as Jamal says, Mahmoud, which I want to turn over to you, Amri, who actually was the one who led us throughout him, along with Yaqub Ode, one of the very well-known Palestinian prisoners. And Yaqub Ode was one of the people who actually co-authored the letter of solidarity to Angela Davis when Angela Davis was in prison, from Palestinian prisoners who were in prison at the time. Yaqub Ali Mahmoud doesn't talk about it. When I interviewed people and I say, so what can you tell me about black Palestinian, Palestinian Sud? They say, no, I'm not Aswad, I'm Asmar. Asmar means olive skin. It's a very different terminology in Arabic. There is a very big discussion about it that I don't know if we actually have the time to talk about it today, and we don't have enough time to talk about it because it actually requires a lot of discussion and so on, and we don't want to shortchange the subject. But there is a lot of history that's not known, that we are just beginning to shed light on it. So I want to turn it over to Emery to speak about speak about your impressions, your interactions. We've met with Mahmoud, we've met with Ali, also about your impressions, and so connected with the history, with the black. So I'm going to actually call on each person to speak 3 to 5 minutes first, and then we can open up. If you need a little bit of time, okay, but so we can have a conversation.
Yes, the meeting was one that was in the old city in Jerusalem. I recall when we first entered, so to give you context, when we talk about going through the Jewish quarters first, when you enter, I recall seeing these racist T-shirts at the stand with something like you would see the Klan or them do, or these racists do, or black faces, and making these derogatory remarks about black people in this country. Well, that's the kind of T-shirts you're seeing done about Palestinians that you're seeing at these Jewish T-shirt stands. Huge volume of them when you went in. I recall when we got to the African quarters, it was just, it's almost like to intimidate. You had this small kiosk with this military, Jewish military guy standing there with the gun. So as, in other words, giving you the effort with where you shouldn't go this way. But the fact that we were with Rabab and the delegation, we went, and I remember when we talked to the brother Ali Jihad, we talked to him for about an hour or so. We had, and we didn't get to take the tour, but we did talk to him in the African quarters, and I was very.
His house was.
Yeah, his house. It's a house or the office. It wasn't the same location that was on the film. So it looked like it was in the receiving area of the house where we talked for about an hour or so. So that was a very and had to ask him questions. He talked about his history in the context of his family and how long generations they had been there prior to him coming. I believe there was something, and I forgot what it was on his table, that we asked him about.
The bombs and the canisters and the tear gas. And
yes. Yeah, he talked about those things in that context. Maybe Rabab can give you more detail of it.
Well,
yeah. But it was, it was very informative. As we went in, there were little kids who were playing outside. And they were welcoming. They were glad to see us. The delegation as a whole come and visit as well. Yeah. But on the sidebar to that as well is, I don't know if we talk about other things. Is, I remember when we left, we started in, I believe it was in Jordan, and we went to Jericho. There we met with some mothers who were families of those who had political prisoners and what have you. And they themselves had been incarcerated for many years. And it was through those journeys and what have you, found out that the only way Palestinians got out was through prison exchange. What I can, in the court system where you got it was through the exchanges that took place. I recall that we went to an artist's complex, you could say. Across the street was the across the road was the graveyard, where the Jewish settlers and everybody was come over and it was Palestinian graveyard. And they would party on it, destroy the graves, all that. But if you were to be blindfolded and you went into this art compound, you would think it was amazing, not knowing what it was, not knowing the history of it. That's the kind of thing that maybe people who take those tours and don't take the right tour guides wouldn't understand that was Palestinian home, their land. There was a mosque there that was then made into a bar or whatever it is, and what have you. So you had that kind of experience that you was a part of and talking to those wherever we went, we were talking to different delegations and people who had been activists, union, political prisoners, many different delegations that we talked to. And it was very, very powerful. We had tours on the buses with us. Who traveled with us and was explaining things to us as we traveled. There are roads that Palestinians don't, they kill them. They kill them out of the Gone Road. We seen where we went to see the mosque, the name of the mosque, the
Ibrahimi Mosque in
yes,
Hebrew.
yes.
Yeah.
And we were up there on the tour, and you see in this pristine area, and if they knew who we were, we'd probably been bricks thrown at us, and tell us to get, wouldn't allow us in that area. But we're going through this area, and this is where the Israelis, they live at. We've seen how you come through, Palestine had to come through the prison gate to get out to go to work and come in. It's very, very enlightening, very informative in many ways, yeah. But I'd like to go say a sidebar. I remember when we went, they used to say on the news, the Chinese used to say they never was supporting training political prisoners, Palestinians, in the early days. And we went to have a delegation. They went to China in 1971. And I was a part of that delegation. And I remember we went to the Great Wall and we seen these guys and they seen us. And we knew they were Palestinians. And they smiled at us and we smiled at them. And we had a brief exchange. And at that time, you had a lawyer with us who worked with Charles Gary, who took a photograph. That evening, the Chinese came to me and Mother Panther and said, Mr. Brodsky took this photograph, and we'd like to have this photograph. Yes. Yes, and you had Brodsky, who's a Jewish lawyer, who tried to play privilege class. I got the right. We said, no, you got to get that picture up. And he gave it up. And so that was my first kind of understanding that what was being said may not be the truth in international politics. Because they were. Yeah.
And okay, so I'm going to come back to you. I just wanted to say that actually the delegation that Emery is speaking about, we have also another member in our, two other members in the audience from that delegation, that if they wish to speak, they can. I'm not forcing people to do it. But I wanted to also say the statement of the delegation that we have actually written in English, and it was translated to 5 languages, is available on the Samidun website, and also it's available on the Ahmed Studies Facebook page. So you can actually go, and if it's not, let me know. I will post all of this stuff. Also, videos from the report back from the delegation. We have multiple report backs. When we here at SFS, you have a few report backs, and in the original room we were supposed to be dedicated to here. But there is also, they are actually exist. There is several report backs we've done. We've done it at the A-Star Arts Alliance and so on. We continue. So a lot of the stuff is available, and people, if you can't find it, just go look at online and so on and ask us. We will post it because it's really important. And it's Ahmed Studies at SFSU on Facebook. You can find it there. I want to, so this is, it's actually a very, very encompassing statement that has a lot of information. There's tons of pictures online and so on. And I want to come back to you, Emery, and I want you to talk about the graphic that you designed after we came back and what happened with it, but not now. So I want to go through history, a journey through history, and turn it over to Phil and speak about the whole question of the statement, the 1970 statement that you signed, and your SNCC role. Again, I'm going to give you 3 to 5 minutes as an opening statement, and I will go back. And I want to pass the statement. Do not keep it. It's my statement. Okay, so I'm gonna share it with you to see the names and so on. It's available, by the way, on the website of Black for Palestine. It doesn't have the highlights, my highlights, and I think this is something we need to discuss. So, Phil, I'll turn it over to you. Okay.
So, almost 3 minutes. Just want to say that the statement came out of an effort of young people. We were mostly in our 20s at the time, to get more immersed in what was happening in the world. Some of us had gotten positions working with the United Nations, and SNCC had a non-governmental organization office there. So we got to meet with people from all over the world for the first time, I guess, period, first time. And for many of us in SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, we were really interested in trying to meet people from Africa and South Africa. And it turned out that one of our best ways to do that was through meeting with Algerians at the United Nations. Because the Algerians in the early 60s were very militant and progressive, and were basically trying to make ties under Ahmed Ben Bella, who was the president, with people in the southern part of Africa, and trying to really talk about this Afro-Asian unity that was talked about but not always done very much. So it was through the Algerians we met people from Africa, and then also we met Palestinians for the first time. And it's really remarkable when something becomes human. When you've been reading about it or hearing people talk about it, and all of a sudden you meet, this is a Palestinian, or this is whatever nation. And it takes a whole different frame of reference. And as we learned more and more about Palestine, and I guess I'm trying to stay in the 3 minutes here, is that we realized that in the United States progressive liberal movements, there was one issue that you weren't supposed to touch and talk about too much, and that was basically Palestine. In fact, it got blurred out. Just talk about Israel and support Israel. So if you were growing up in New York or Boston or someplace particularly on the East Coast, you'd be in favor of tenant rights, you'd be in favor of labor and education, and then also you'd be in favor of Israel. And it's like, wait a minute, these are all domestic issues. How does Israel get in here and why? But there were people who were very fiercely defending that there was a connection here. And so part of our thing was to try to find out why, being these students and being curious, and also being told that there's something you couldn't do, pushed us on to try and do more and find out about this. So as we did research, we talked to people around the world, particularly who were coming through New York and the United Nations, and out of that process, we decided to make a statement to the world about Palestine, and where else and how better in the United States to make a statement than to do something in the New York Times. And so we had, I guess it wasn't so much an article, it was more just a statement, talking about why it was important to recognize the fact that there was Israeli oppression in Palestinians. And we emphasized that we did not want to use the word Jewish. By and large, we didn't use the word Israeli a lot. We talked more about Zionism. And our feeling was at that time, and for many of us still now, that Zionism is a form of racism. And that got us in a whole lot of trouble. And back here at home in the United States, and we lost money, we lost political support. Why don't you just stay in your own business, a civil rights business? And don't, you don't know that much about world affairs to say anything. And so that just fired us more to fight back, because we felt that we were onto something, because people were fighting. Some people were fighting so hard to keep things the way they were, and to cover up also what was happening in Palestine. And so the statement was a way of beginning to get into that motion and put that out. And if there was opposition, domestic opposition, there was opposition, particularly with African American, a growing sector of African Americans. It wasn't every single African American you saw, but it was basically a growing sector, people who were politically involved and wanted to experience the world. So that's what the statement came out of.
And you also spoke about how you shared before, maybe you can also share with the students the way in which you saw the Time magazine, and like for your own personal experience, as not only SNCC but you as Phil, and what you were involved in later on as well.
Well, I was involved, goodness, I've been involved in so many things over the years.
Time magazine, if you can share the story when you saw Palestinian on the cover.
Oh, that was New York Times.
Yes.
Magazine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was looking one Sunday morning at the Times paper, and I looked at the New York Times book magazine section, and there was this picture of this brown-skinned man on it who was kind of a peasant, worker, something, and he was Palestinian. And the shock is he looked just like my father. And I said, goodness, my father could be, if he were living in Palestine, he would be getting all the attacks and venom that was happening to the Palestinians. So it made me think a little bit, what side of the fence am I going to be on this one? When you see somebody who you feel close, could feel close. I didn't know this person, obviously, but since so much is seen by looks, by race and stuff like that, and value judgments come from that, as I began to say, I better get more into this. And I would eventually join Palestine Solidarity Committees and working for Palestine in the United States. And I did, and I guess since you began this on Jerusalem, tell me about Jerusalem. I had the opportunity to go to Jerusalem in 1990, and for about 2 weeks. And I just want to say to everybody in the room, if you have a chance, you should go to Jerusalem. It's a world historic center, home of 3 religions, countless historical battles, lots of history crisscross, and just a lot of miracle things that you find. And I mean, 2 things really wake me out. Number one was that I was about 48 when I went, And I looked at when Israel was formed and when I was born. I realized I am actually older than the state of Israel. On the other hand, when I went over to the Armenian Quarter and talked to some of these, listened to some of these old guys who were just talking about thousands of years. It's like in the same piece of space, we can talk about thousands of years, and yet the current Israeli military dictatorship is not that old. Looking at it in that perspective, and then just my life itself as an actor and meeting people who were Palestinians in Palestine was really important, and it's a great city. You should really try to go see it. It's worth it. It's a long trip, but it's worth it.
I want to say that actually we have been doing a whole bunch of delegations, and the last one we were supposed to do was last summer. We were actually going to have a course, study abroad in Palestine, and we went through the whole permission and so on, and actually it was canceled by San Francisco State at the end, and they ran us through the ringer. I'm more than happy to discuss all the details about it because we believe that this was discrimination involved in it, but we intend to continue doing it. And I think when you talk about the whole question of racism and so on, I'm reminded, my father studied in the US from 1947 to 1952, and this was during the height of Jim Crow in Knoxville, Tennessee. And when he was telling us how he went to study, and so there's a lot of stories, but one of them is actually about the colored bathrooms that he and other Palestinian students had to also use at the time, because also they were considered to be quote unquote,
Right.
colored and so on in the South. So there is a lot of experiences that we can.
Yeah. I mean, you can see. I mean, you can read about racism in the South, but going through Jerusalem, you can begin to see about racism in a different context. I mean, the license plates were a different color for the Jews and for the Arabs, and
The IDs,
all that was different.
Jamal is talking about.
Right, and in some ways very close to what was in the Republic of South Africa, except probably even a little bit more sophisticated.
And actually the statement of the 1970, which is going around, you can see also, there's a lot of references to South Africa, there are a lot of references to, if we start into that, it will take a lot of time. So I want to get to Nesbet, and then I want to go back to kind of like talk about what connections we could have with San Francisco State. But I want you to talk, Nesbet, about the whole connection that you've had and how you see the 1968 strike and also 2016 and so on, and the connection of why do you think, as somebody who's actually was involved in 1968, we would not be here if Nesbet and other students, Black Student Union, Third World Liberation Front did not do what they did in 1968. We would not have a College of Ethnic Studies, we would not have Ahmed Studies program, we would not be able to teach our lived experiences of our communities and have that validated and respected. So if you can, just speak to that.
Good afternoon, everybody. My understanding was this is going to be a discussion, and I'm looking out, and I'm so happy to see so many of you here. All of you are way, way, way in the back and everything, and it's like the classroom. And I wish it weren't like the classroom. I wish some of you would come up here so we could really
So
talk.
come on, all of you who are sitting in the back, come closer.
I'm just saying it would be good if you want to, and it would be lovely. Let me just say that I was sitting here, and does everybody know who this man is? I'm very serious. Does everybody know? This is Emory Douglas. He is the art minister of the Black Panther Party. His pictures,
We can
his
pass it around,
drawings
also don't take it.
are all over the world.
Yes, do not even dare.
Not only in the United States, but all over the world. I saw his pictures when I was in Cuba, just in November of this year, of last year, I'm sorry. I saw his pictures in South Africa when I was in Port Elizabeth, and then when I was in Johannesburg. I saw one of your pictures in the ANC headquarters in Johannesburg. And he was talking about going to the People's Republic of China in when?
1971.
In 1971. That's damn near 49 years ago. And that's longer than some of y'all have been in this world. Is that true? Yeah, okay. So I'm just trying to put this in perspective. These are all three of us here. I'm not going to include my brother here and Rabab, but all three of us are oldsters. We have been around for a long time. I'm talking about involved in the progressive study. I'm not talking about how long we live. I'm saying that because there is a certain energy, there's a certain vibe that's going through us based upon our experience and based upon our background that encourages us to continue to do this. When I was here, I was, I'm not sure if Rabab or Jaime know this, but I was a student, I was a graduate student in the School of Business. And my work-study job was being administrative assistant to Dr. Nathan Hare, who was the director of the Black Studies Institute. And I was happy doing that. You know, I thought I was going to get my master's degree in personnel and work for Clorox. That was my. And I planned, you know, and I felt, you know, I was hired by the Black Studies Department because I had, you know, I had been in the Air Force. I was an Air Force officer in personnel. And I had experience in personnel, and I had experience in finance, and they figured, hey, you know. And what happened is one day I went to a class just like this. I was sitting way in the back, just like this sister was way back there. And I went to this class, and it was, and his name was Leroy Jones at that time, Mari Baraka, and Sonia Sanchez. And they taught this Black Studies science course. And it totally blew my mind. You ever heard of being turned out? You know what being turned out means? It means that my mind was so blown that I never returned to where I was. And so I started becoming active with the Black Student Union and with the Third World Liberation Front. And of course, what happened was that because I had this administrative background, they decided, well, we will bring him in and he'll be our financial coordinator. So I was the financial coordinator for the Black Student Union. And so then I became the financial coordinator for the Third World Liberation Front. So I was on the central committee of both organizations because I had a financial background. I'm saying this, I'm trying to put this out of the myth area and put it in the reality as to just how it happened. Now, the Black Student Union and Third World Liberation Front were democratic centralist organizations. You know what that means? Democratic centralism meant that, as Lenin would say, all voices is free from discussion. All discussion is free, but unity of decision. And so that's what we believed in. What we believed in was you walked in the Black Student Union hut, and it was truly a hut. It wasn't a building, it was a hut. And the first thing you saw was Ho Chi Minh, Viet Cong. This is 1967 we're talking about. We were internationalists. That is, we believed that based upon many of the precepts of the Rendun Conference, that the people, oppressed people, people of color, people who are not associated with the Soviet Union or with the United States, third world people had a right to exist, had a right to determine their own destiny. I have I have all kinds of notes. I clearly am not going to be able to say everything I want to say. So I'm just going to say this. Show you how way out I am. I do not believe in the Middle East. I think that we were talking about Northeast Africa. Now, if you think I'm crazy, what I want you to do is I want you to go to a geological map and check out the various different plates that connect the mainland of Africa with this area that we now call the Middle East. And it's really Northeast Africa. I say that to say, if you look at old newsreel film, if you see pleasant newsreel film of Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, you'll see black people much blacker than anybody up on the stage. And these people were not part of the diaspora, as Rabab was saying. These people were born there. These people were bred there. These people may have come from Chad, or may have come from Nigeria, or may have come from Nigeria, but it was a long time ago. So, I'm going to stop with this. So when you think of, I'm going to go to this question, there's Ali Muhammad Jinnah. There's some, well, what about Jesus? Do you think he was white? You know, white supremacy is a very, very, very sick thing. Euro-American chauvinism is a very, very sick thing. What it says is that things we treasure, things that are important to us, especially when it comes to human beings, especially when it comes to theology, especially when it comes to philosophy, has to be white. Ali Muhammad Jinnah said that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth. How could he be blind and blue-eyed? I want you to just think about this now. You see the people living in the Middle East, Northeast Africa, just remember that. You see all these people, and I'm trying not to talk about it from a racist standpoint. I'm trying to talk about it from a genuine imperialistic standpoint. It is really sad that it is thought in this country that in order for people to treasure, to understand, to listen to praise, and to pray to this Son of God, he has to be white. He cannot be as he was. He cannot have nappy hair. He cannot have broad facial features, because then people would not appreciate it. And I'm saying all of these things are bombarded to you. All these things were bombarded to us. And until we learn about ourselves, we had no realization of what a trick game we've been put on. That's what ethnic studies is about. That's what ethnic studies is about. That's why we closed this place down for over 5 months and said, if we can't have what we want, nobody will learn. Because it is important for you to understand what your history is before you can love yourself, before you can appreciate yourself, before you can realize just how beautiful you really are. Keeping in mind you're living in a white supremacist world. I'm not just talking about the United States, I'm talking about the world. I guess I'm sorry.
Okay.
Was
No,
that my
that's
thing?
fine. I actually wanted to say a few things as I have raised a question to Jamal, and then open it up to folks and so on, and then come back to the panel to also continue having the conversation. I just wanted to say a few things that just comment on what you've talked about. Jerusalem is really kind of like old, like Israel is young and Jerusalem is old. And I remember one time we were in Bethlehem in the Church of the Church of Nativity Church, And we saw a young Palestinian guide, and we said, "Oh, he was 500 years," and we said, "This is really old." He said, "Oh no, that's really young. It's only 500 years old." So it's really important to keep the perspective, the historical perspective and the geographic perspective. The same thing that you've mentioned, Nesbeth, about the whole question of geology, because actually Africa and Asia were this is the geographical kind of like divisions and so on, but it's part of the same thing. Before the Dead Sea parted on its own or broke or whatever people want to think about, but it is the same. And actually the first diaspora of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was to what is called today Ethiopia. Actually wasn't to Medina, and many people don't even know that. So actually if people like look into that, it comes up. I thought you were mentioning about Bandung, Nesbeth, and this year is also the 50th anniversary of the passing of Jamal Abdel Nasser, who was the president of Egypt, who actually was one of the people, he and other people, free officers, overthrew the corrupt regime of King Farouk in 1952. And in 1955, Abdel Nasser, Nkrumah, Nehru, a few came together and at Bandung and actually started the non-aligned movement to think about a non-capitalist path of development. Actually, that was, and there is a lot of history about that, so we can talk about that. I think it's really important to also remember what happened then. And the statement that passing, you can see there is lots of reference about the Jordanian regime's massacres against Palestinians, which is now referred to as Black September, in 1970. And there is a lot of discussion about it. The statement also came also as in response to a statement that was put by other black leaders in the civil rights movement, especially led by Bayard Rustin, that actually issued a statement in the New York Times in support of Israel. And so this statement came out in response to kind of say, no, actually we are, and this is the politics that Nesbeth is talking about, this is the politics that Emery is talking about, this is the politics that Phil is talking about. There is a particular politics, so it's really kind of like when we say Black Palestinian solidarity, we are talking about a black perspective that's actually gaining grounds now more and more and more with the movement for Black Lives, with Ferguson, with multiple ways in which there is a particular, the support for Palestine, solidarity for Palestine actually comes out of a commitment to the indivisibility of justice, come out of a commitment against imperialism, colonialism, US intervention in Vietnam, against the racism, COINTELPRO, and all of the stuff that was going on. So it's not separate. It's not a foreign issue per se, if you want to even say foreign, if you want to even accept. If you want to lock yourself within the boundaries, even the United States doesn't lock itself into the boundaries, so we're the only ones. So I'm going to turn it over to you. So I wanted to mention, I'm not even going to talk about Bernawi now. I want to ask you to connect what you are saying, aside from the fact that actually I really don't think Jerusalem deserts are better than Nablus, but that's another discussion. Okay, that's a very, very big discussion. But I wanted you to connect Jerusalem, our classes also with San Francisco State, if you don't mind, and if you want to say something else as well before we.
Well, just few things, because I also want to give the students the opportunity to ask questions. I know that Kulsum soon will be leaving, but first I'll start by, because you talked about time and age of things, 500 years or whatever. And this is the discrimination that we face, Jerusalemites, when we travel through Ben Gurion Airport. The question they always ask me, what's the purpose of your visit here?
To Israel.
Yeah, even though on my passport says that I was born in Jerusalem. That's the first thing, that's the first question. And I'm like, well, my family's house was built during the age of Suleiman the Magnificent. So, and they have this shock on their face because, I mean, some of you wanna Google who is Suleiman the Magnificent, so, because we don't have the exact time when our Dajani homes were built in the Nabi Dawood, but we know that they were built during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, and he was the great Caliph during the Ottoman Empire. I think Suleiman the Magnificent was born the year 1494, something, died 1566. But that just gives you an idea about time that our family lived in the same house since the time of Suleiman the Magnificent. And this is what most people who are now there, they're newcomers, and they have no concept except of what they've been fed by Zionist propaganda about, come to the land for the people who without land, without people for the people without land. That whole concept that Palestine is empty, doesn't have its indigenous communities, didn't have this history, this long history that just waiting for you in 1948 to come or before from Europe and occupy it because it's there. That's the whole idea. And then I might be a little bit free associating a little bit, deviating from your question. But it also reminds me of this whole idea of the ethnic cleansing. The whole idea when I came to the United States, and both my experience in San Francisco, because my older brother lived in San Francisco. He actually came here as a student at San Francisco State University. So I came here in the mid-70s. That's the first place where I stayed. I stayed with him. I didn't know anyone in the United States, my brother, and then I went to New York to go to Columbia University in New York. In the mid-70s, I remember, there was a thriving African-American community on the Desdero Street, the Fillmore, Western Addition. We used to see people, I said, this is where my brothers and sisters were living. Then I went to New York, and in New York, my first home was in Harlem. Both actually lived in Harlem and East Harlem. And the first thing before I went to New York, people were warning me, why are you living there? I would go on the train, and on 96th Street, the train will empty out from all white people, just like it's only me and my brothers and sisters from Africa, and everyone was saying, why are you going there? And they were the first ones when I went there. What's your name, brother? I remember I said, I'm Jamal from Palestine. And the guy said, oh, Arafat. I remember they'd say something like this. And then they just like, okay, here's our brother Jamal from Palestine. But every single person, every single person would just, here I left discrimination, occupation, and I came to another discrimination and occupation right in the United States. Right in the United States, we had boundaries in Jerusalem, but you can't go from one neighborhood to the other, which, by the way, so Ali Jidda, last time I was with my wife, crossing that same gate, and guess what, I had my best friend there, my childhood friend, and he's a dentist, the guards, they looked at him immediately and said, you guys, they assumed we were tourists, you guys can go through, but he can't. And he grew up in Jerusalem all his life, so we had to do that extra long walk to go towards the Armenian Quarter and the Wailing Wall, while the first walk only took us 5 minutes, right? Then, as time passes, I moved my family here, I moved to California, and I came back just before the earthquake in the '88. The African American community disappeared from the Fillmore, disappeared from the Western Addition. Just very few, call it whatever you call it, under economical gentrification. They like to use these fancy words, but that's ethnic cleansing.
Call it redevelopment.
Redevelopment, it's ethnic cleansing. This is the connection for me before I connect between Jerusalem, my life, the places where I live the most in the United States, which is San Francisco Bay Area and New York Bay Area. I witnessed what I left behind, which is ongoing, sadly, because my family still faces this on a daily basis. And then to come here to the United States under the redevelopment, branding, or gentrification is also ongoing. So for me, that's the main connection.
I will get back to San Francisco. I want to just open it up actually, but I would like students to shout out the names of the groups that you are belong to. So if you can just mention what student, because we can organize some things as faculty, but really students need to make more space for people like this amazing people on the panel to be able to share and so on. But I'm not asking you to commit to organizing. I just want to hear what student groups are present in the room. If you don't speak, I will say it. So you should say it yourself. Okay, so do you want to say what groups you were involved in when you were at San Francisco State?
When I was at San Francisco State, I was involved in the Jewish Students Against Zionism.
Jews Against Zionism. Okay, do you want to say what groups you're involved in? Yes.
Muslim Student Association.
Muslim Student Association. Do you want to say what group you're involved in?
I'm with GUPS, the General Union of Palestine Students.
GOVS, General Union of Palestine Students, any other student groups that you're involved in. You don't have to be on the board or something, but you may be a member or affiliate. Anybody wants to say something? No? Yes?
Maybe just people should ask questions.
Yeah, I just want to like just see what student groups there in response to what Nisbet is saying. Okay, anything? Okay, so questions. Raise your hands. I will take a stack, 3 questions at a time, and then we. Yes. Okay. So we have Savannah. Yes. Do you have a question? What you? No. Yes. Okay. And what? And yeah. Okay. Savannah, and then we'll take 2 questions, and then we will go to another round. Go ahead, Savannah.
Yes, so one, thank you all for your time.
And can you raise your voice maybe so everybody can hear?
Oh yeah, let me know if I need to be louder for folks. But thank you all for your work, and I love how you commented on commitment and time, because I've been thinking about that a lot, about the commitment to this work and seeing everything in the long run. But I wanted to question, I guess, your point about when things become human. I thought that was a brilliant point that you made, that it's different when it's hard to explain, but when it becomes real, I guess, and how you made that point about third world people that live in the third world deserve rights, and that being kind of like so it seems like it's a normal thing to say, but when you actually fight for internationalism, that work becomes radical. I currently also work with CSPES, which is the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. And a year ago I went for the elections delegation, and that I'm also Nicaraguan, so of course these last few days talking about Nicaragua has been exhausting, but seeing, I guess, like the homeland of Central America, and then also the migration crisis that's currently happening, I guess my question is more also actually adding to Latin America as a racial project itself, in terms of like the Spanish colonizing all of it, but not just that, enslaving the African peoples and forcing them into Latin America as well. I thought it was a great point of the history of how you say the Northeast Africa, and that those people have been there for years, like centuries, if anything. And we just seeing the difference, I guess. How would you, I guess, like would you see that, I guess, as like white supremacy at work of these white folks who went to Latin America, and now we have the mestizaje, like me, like a mixture, but would you say that's an example of how white supremacy works, where we see who the most powerful is in Latin America now, versus like, I guess, Northeast Africa, of like who's in power there, and what ideologies within that, like we saw with the kids raised by Zionists using slurs.
Okay, I'm gonna hold on. There is a student in the back. Is that connected? Can you just say your name, please?
Josiah.
Josiah. Can you stand?
My question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I know you guys were talking about the African diaspora, and I think it was a surprise that there was I guess quarter or group in Palestine. I guess really the question is, I guess why do we forget about these other groups that are in other countries and other places, and also tied into like the African diaspora, how deep it is.
What was the last part though? Also
And
what?
tied into the African diaspora and how
Yes.
deep it is.
Great
Yes.
question.
One more, and then I'm gonna turn it over to the panel. Yes? No? Okay. So.
What I was going to, I'd like to just start by saying, I think it is wonderful that we have young people here representing organizations. But I think it's even more important that we have individuals here who don't represent any organization, who's here and who can learn and we can help dialogue with. And I think that's really, really important, because a lot of times we come into something and we don't represent an organization, we just represent ourselves, and that's vitally important. And I think that's wonderful. What I see, and I'll let Emery and Phil speak to this also. What I see is that for as long as I can remember myself, there have been some people who've been internationalists, and they were internationalists without calling themselves that. I'll give you an example. Give you an example. Now, I'm just think about this. You ever seen this picture called Ocean's 11? Okay. That was Frank Sinatra and all of these so-called progressive white dudes, and then they had one profit drop. You remember who that was? Sammy Davis Jr. And he was so involved in being accepted by these white people, by these well-known entertainers, that he was the happiest, hardest laughing, most enthusiastic member of that group. Because he wanted to be part of that group really, really badly. At that same time, many ethnic groups supported the black struggle, but one group really supported and had a history of it. You know who that were? The Jewish community. Come on, y'all. And so what happened is that the vast majority of the black community supported the establishment of the Jewish homeland and Jews. Sammy Davis Jr. was so enthusiastic about it, he converted to Judaism, and black people in general just loved it. Oh, look how receptive the Jews are. Okay. In my family, I'm just going to share this. In my family, the sisters and the mothers and the brothers of the church, I was brought up in a Baptist church, one of their greatest dreams was to go to the Holy City. And so they would take these tours sponsored by Israel, all these black people, going to the Holy City, going to Israel, and they would do just like Ali Muhammad Jinnah said. The Jews told them, you go through this area, you spend your money with the Jews, and when you get to the Israel with the Arabs, don't look at them, keep your hand in your pocket, and walk fast as you can. That's true. The picking of Northeast Africa for the settlement of the Jews. Think about this now. Who suppressed, killed, and decimated the Jews more than anybody in the world, as far as we know? The Nazi Germans, correct? Help me now. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And so when the Holocaust was over, and when they needed to find a place to stay, how did it happen coincidentally that they picked Northeast Africa? Why didn't they pick somewhere in Europe? Why? Well, because, this is, the Jews and Moses and all that. We're talking about geopolitics. We're talking about Eurocentric power. And that's the reason why that location right there. Black people, people of color, and poor white people all over this world suffer from the dregs of white supremacy. From the standpoint of race, the capitalists feel that if they can divide you by race, if they can make you feel that because you have more melanin in your skin than this person over here, the person with the less melanin is better automatically because they have less melanin in their skin, and they're better than you, then they can use that type of dichotomy, that type of white supremacy, that type of racism, then to divide you, and then the capitalists can just flow over. And this happened all over the various different countries of the world. All right, 1:30.
One of my thoughts now.
There is two questions. One about the whole question of the human and the whole question of internationalism, Afro, Asia, Latin America, and thinking about the settler colonialism project. Right?
Well, internationalism for myself is always growing up, raising Fillmore. Came in when Fillmore was a black Mecca. Understanding, raised up knowing Hugo Bernal, which you may not know him, from Nicaragua. We used to keep pool together and play together as kids before he went to prison. So was set up and went to prison. There were other, and you had the we used to travel to the mission district, always had been people of color, diverse from different parts of the world. So that was always a part of who I was and how I, before I became really aware of Palestine. That became when I got into the Black Panther. Of course, before you heard things from time to time, but when I got into the Black Panther Party, it's when I became aware. And it was during the Black Panther Party that you had people in the party was telling those young whites that they had to take a position. They had to go out and they had to take a position in solidarity with Palestine, because that's what our position. And they were activists, they were working in the community, they wanted to, but they have to be able to, we invited them to speak at press conferences. We invited them to talk at rallies in solidarity with those issues during that period in time. So that was a part of the makeup of the Black Panther Party during that period. You'll even see pictures, you'll see, when we used to talk about Hamas and others in the Black Panther Party national section of the paper back in those days. 1969, when we went to Algeria and we had that exile, we used to meet. We met then with Yasser Arafat when he was there for a conference. That was in 1969. We went to the press conference there as well that they were having, what Palestinians were having during that time. So, and we used to look at them in the context of the resistance of the struggle and what was going on with the struggle during that time. All that used to be what we used to, Layla Ali, all those, all that we used to, that was part of the Black Panther Party publication. Yes. We had pamphlets who went to Palestine. And because inside there was some resistance inside of Israel who called themselves Israeli Panthers, and he tried to go there and they refused to allow that delegation into Israel because of that. So we have a long history in the context of the Black Panther Party. We had, in our solidarity.
And I'm going to actually, after Phil speaks, I will call on Jamal to maybe even speak about the whole question of the differences within the Jewish community and so on. I just wanted to say also on April 6th and 8th, we are having two events in conjunction with other classes, women and gender studies on. One is going to be on queer solidarities with Palestine. The other one is we're going to show actually the film about Layla Khaled hijacker, because it's going to be the 50th anniversary. And that's actually, I mean, this is including the way that she and Patricio Arguello from Nicaragua took on, and that was called the Che Guevara Brigade. And so we're going to be actually like showing that film and having discussion and thinking about, rethinking about what does this mean then, what does the question of hijacking, how does it link with resistance, and so on. So we're doing all this historical.
Yeah, just one more thing.
Yeah, sure.
The young white people are talking about were young Jews, and they were in solidarity, but they were scared. They say our parents will kill us. And we try to go in the community and talk to them. That was their mindset. That was their mindset, and it was only at that point, I think through SNCC, and during that period when they had separation in relationship with those, and it was because I believe they wanted more white people in SNCC to be educate white people about racism as opposed to trying to dictate policy and what was going on in the black community. It was not about turning against them or anything like that. It was a political decision that was made in relationship to how to move forward. If we were going to move forward, you had to civilize and educate those who had these misinformation, had been, how they've been defined situations and what have you. I could say also condition what you were brought up on the nativity, Easter, holidays, all that was always about white supremacy. Yes, it was always about white supremacy. Institutional racism that you were dealing with, that was the structure. Because everything it was defined to you through the images that you seen. John Wayne, Bob Hope, all these things. You had, it's true. When you had Nat King Cole, he was only given 15 minutes on TV. When everybody else was getting an hour or so, he was only getting a 15-minute show. So you had all those things connected.
And I was thinking maybe Phil and Jamal, you can also address this whole point about, like, there is a lot of mix-up. When you say white supremacy, people think white people, and the same way that you say Zionism, it becomes about Jewish people. So I was wondering if you can also, along this conversation, kind of like fine-tune this discussion and speak about it, unless you want to speak about something else.
Well, I want to say something else.
Okay.
Briefly.
It's fine. And then Jamal can do that. It's fine.
That,
This is an organic discussion. So
right. And this is the context of this is growing up in the 50s and listening to my father and parents and their generation who were right before us. And how African American, in fact, we didn't even call ourselves African Americans, we were Negroes, Negro or colored people.
I'm sorry, actually there is an article about you in the New York Times when you were arrested in St. Louis, and next to it there is another article about Negroes supporting Palestine.
Right, Negroes, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the point is, I want to make is that we were told basically two things in my parents' generation. And that's why I equate the growing internationalism with breaking out of all these little blocks that we've been put in. The first one was that the black population was 10% of the U.S. population, which meant that the white population was 90% of the U.S. population. And therefore, that's the way it's going to go, buddy. And don't try to get out of your...
You're out.
Yeah, you're out. And even the idea of making coalitions wouldn't quite get us up to 90%. Yeah. So we were welcomed to the degree, of quotation marks around the welcome. It might be what classes in the black community you were talking to. And they were permitted to do work, but it was always in the sense that this was only 10% of the population, a really minority issue and a minority opinion. And it took the 60s to actually burst that asunder and grow out of that and say, we're going to do a whole different arithmetic of politics. And based on politics, and internationalism was definitely one of them. The other piece which comes very close to that is, it had to do with SNCC and Martin Luther King and Vietnam, Israel, is that you guys are only supposed to deal with domestic stuff. You know? We deal with, the white folks, or the white people in power who were synonymous at that time, white and powerful. We deal with the international stuff. You know, you just play in the little domestic playpen. And so there was a tremendous amount of friction around that, but we were basically pressed to stay in very narrow corners. At the same time, the world was bursting out in Africa, and Asia, the Vietnam War, Latin America, Che Guevara and Fidel, and so we were always champing at the bit. And at a certain time, we had to basically break those. And who has our politics, and who politics we have, and but it broke that historical trend, which pretty much went from the 1920s to through the 1950s. I just thought that was important to say.
Yeah, well, just quickly, because I know a lot of you have to leave soon. There is a major misconception about the whole conflict when people talk about Palestinian-Israeli conflict, trying to label it as a religious war. I mean, this is, you hear this time and time again. Even yesterday I was watching the debates and Bloomberg, it was like, oh, the Arabs and Jews have been at it for decades, and he was talking about throwing the Shiite divide, the Sunni, Shiite, whatever. So they always try to kind of identify this whole area with religious wars when they actually don't know much about the history. You know, the history, for example, of Palestine, the history of the whole area, the history of the Jewish communities in Palestine, outside Palestine. So everyone, we talk about Jews coming from Europe, right? The Ashkenazis, we have the Mizrahis, we have the Sephardics, the ones who came with the Arabs who were faced the Inquisition together and got kicked out of the Iberian Peninsula, and then it ended up some in northern Africa and all the way made their way to Bilad al-Sham, which is the greater Syria. This is where Palestine exists today. And then many of the Mizrahi Arabs came from Yemen, Iraq. They consider themselves as Arab Jews, and the Palestinian community were the Sumerians, right, by Nablus, who are before the creation of many of those entities that occupied. The issue itself is about settler colonialism. White supremacy and the connection of settler colonialism. It's not that different from what happened in Northern Africa to Algeria, where the French basically came, took over Algeria and settled the land for more than 180 years. At the end of the day, they started to believe and think not only that they were occupying or colonizing the land, the French wanted to convince the rest of the world that Algeria was part of France. And then that's now going on in basically in Palestine.
Yeah. Okay, any other question? I know that Jocelyn's question about why is it that we forget is very, very important, about why do we forget. And I think I think that this is kind of like we discuss it a lot in the class and we have, but I think it's really part of kind of like what's convenient for historical amnesia, deliberate amnesia, to not think about what has happened and what sort of oppressions have happened and also what sort of resistance has happened. And I think this is part of the scholarship itself, against which the 1968 strike took place, and against which struggles are going on today in Syracuse University, in multiple other spaces, the whole question of taking down the quote-unquote Confederate statues and so on. It's all about what history are we talking about, whose history gets told, whose history gets privileged, and whose narratives gets to become the dominant one for everybody, and including the whole narrative around Palestine, around racism, against the 60s, and I think this is part of it. I mean, like to think about why is that war, why are these stories not told? And also then when we tell them, how do we tell them? Because also when we tell them, in what ways do we tell them? And to what purpose do we tell them? Do we tell them in order for us to advance justice-centered knowledge? Or do we tell them in order for us to advance more domination and more oppression and use the university as a place to produce docile citizens who will actually go on then and accept the status quo the way it is and not fight for justice? And we are here, part of the ethnics of this tradition, part of this kind of tradition, the spirit of 68. I believe that as faculty, as students, as members of the community, we really need to come together in order to push back against such sort of normalizing of injustice and the whole question of like business as usual when things are not just, and so on, and speak about and learn about them. So I think that's part of it. I don't think it is only particular about Palestine or the Afro-Palestinian community, and there are multiple stories. I mean, we don't even have enough time to talk about everything. One film is not enough. There is so much more to it. It's just a question of kind of beginning the conversation, introducing it, and being able to speak more about it. Okay, I'm going to have the panelists. We have 5 more minutes. I'm going to have the panelists actually say lasting words. I'm really hoping that people would want to do this research. I'm hoping that people would want to be able to host more discussions and to engage. I think it's amazing that we have our elders, the people who've actually struggled, not only speak about, actually struggle themselves. These stories really need to be told, and that's also part of the way how we build knowledge and how we learn about it. So and also, by the way, we have no money. We did not even offer honorarium. We have no money whatsoever. So this is part of like the community commitment to doing a different project. So we're very grateful to that, and we're going to try to change that. So we're struggling to change that as well. So I'm going to just ask people to maybe go for any lasting words for now. Yeah.
Well, I would encourage everyone, if you ever get a chance to take the journey to Palestine, how we go. It was a very powerful, very informative and enlightening. I mean, I just say this one, when we went to the prisons, the young man was being charged, they're charging
we attended military tribunals for children.
For children.
Yeah.
When the Israeli children go to very simple court, same age. So you have that issue there. That's you see that, it's very powerful. Shows you right there what's happening. Went to a lawyer, civil rights lawyer, talked to him, his family, and his son had recently been killed, I believe. And when we got ready to leave, he took us to the balcony to look down at his place where he lived at and collected punishment. They destroyed his whole house. This is what they were doing to many others whose families who had martyrs. They come in and destroy the whole family's house. When we went to visit this Palestinian family who had this whole complex, and no one was living in the front part, the Jewish settlers came and took it over. They couldn't move them out. They slapped the elder. All that.
And that's by the way the cult, one of the cult family that Jamal was referring to. I think.
Well, I'm gonna say something a little different. Not opposed at all. And
Yeah.
Black power, or international black power, which we talked a lot about in the 60s, was never specifically a racial term. And that we used to have a slogan in SNCC, my group, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, saying blackness is necessary, but it is not sufficient. Politics is sufficient, and that basically makes it. And during that time period, the 60s and 70s, probably what was happening internationally was in England, which I thought was really interesting. Is the Black Power movement in England was made up of Africans, Indians, Pakistanis, Arabs, and all. Because what was bringing them together was not the black color of the skin at all. I mean, for the people who were black it was, but it was also the politics. And that's what we try to get people to see, that the politics is really very, very important. And that that's the key that leads that's the tugboat that leads the ship. And that's where your focus is best. And on that basis, you can make alliances, as would happen there. And in the United States, we had the Rainbow Coalition, set up by Fred Hampton and the Panthers, later Jesse Jackson.
And Jack Odell.
And Jack Odell, yeah, the late Jack Odell. And we tried to make very conscious alliances even up until the 80s and 90s with particularly Latinos, which was the growing population increasingly, and people in the Southeast Asian community who were large parts of urban, what had been urban black communities. All of a sudden they're not across the sea, they're right here in our neighborhood. So we have to figure out how to work together. And politics, understanding who these people are, what their role in the U.S. is, why they got sent here, and the attempts that are used to divide us against each other became important in terms of their work.
Yes, Ben?
I want to go back to the question that the sister asked in the first row around white supremacy. You know, there are various different levels and perceptions of white supremacy. There's cultural, there's political, there's economic. From a cultural standpoint, I'm talking about worldwide now. Just listen to this. Worldwide, among most of the cultures, among most of the tribes, among most of the various ethnicities in the world, the lighter you are, the more attractive people think of you. And the darker you are, the less they think of you. This goes on in the Dominican Republic. This goes on in Haiti. Goes on in Cuba. Goes on in Puerto Rico. Goes on in the United Kingdom.
Brazil.
Goes on in Brazil. Colorism, it's called. Colorism. That's a cultural aspect. What I would dare say is that in your experience, when you leave here and go about your daily life, go about your empirical life, just think on the fact of what is your attitude about complexion and where did that come from? And if you think about it historically and politically, it comes from a white supremacist perspective. Politically, many of the Nazis that escaped from Germany before the Nazis were defeated went to various different in South American countries. Argentina, Uruguay, many of the countries, Brazil, whatever, okay? Many of the Spanish, of the quote unquote Latins who left Hispaniola, left the Hispanic Peninsula, left Spain, left Portugal, and came to the New World of lighter skin, you know, came as slave holders, some came as indentured services, worked themselves out of it, and then start owning other people who just happen to be black or brown or red. The point I'm trying to make is that as long as there's a political or an economic resolution that relates to colorism or relates to white supremacy from the standpoint of what you can attain or what you should know about yourself as a person, then that can be a dangerous thing if it is not equitable. The reason why we needed to deal with establishing a black studies or ethnic studies, school of ethnic studies at San Francisco State was because the vast majority of the children of the mission, the vast majority of the children of the Fillmore or of the Hunters Point did not feel that they could attend the school. Their attitudes were that this was like higher education and that they were not able to, they were not worth learning, they did not have the inclination to learn, and because they didn't know about themselves. Most of us, when we were growing up, did not want to be associated with Africa. Oh no. Oh no. Because the picture we saw of Africa were monkeys and people swinging from vines and shit, and of course the highest, most effective, the most powerful person in Africa swinging from the trees was who? Tarzan. No, but the point I'm trying to make is that when you are bombarded with this kind of bullshit gear after a while you start saying shit. Maybe that's true. If you're not given the opportunity to learn the truth, if you're not given the opportunity to learn the truth about what's happening in Palestine as opposed to what's happening in Israel. You know, this whole thing about David and Goliath and shit. And Goliath was a Philistine, and our Philistines are the Arabs. And David had a slingshot and killed this great big old man. And that shows you the faith of what? Faith of being a Jew, going to a land that was empty and without people. And the land was fertile and people all over the goddamn place. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right, I want to thank.
Before you thank, I want to say, because I did not actually say who Jamal Dajani is, I'm going to embarrass you and say Jamal Dajani is a People Award-winning journalist. He is the former Commissioner of Human Rights in San Francisco. Also has a radio talk show on Thursday from 2 to 3 on Arab Talk Radio. And Jamal has been working very, very hard to actually teach and offer education. It's like our community who is very much involved in this. And so I'm going to give you the last word.
Actually, I want to thank our guests.
Yes.
And of course, I thank you all for supporting Carmen and supporting our classes. Thank you. Emily Douglas, Hudson, we really appreciate your work and your support, and we learned a lot from you. Thank you. And for those who came late from my class, you can still watch the documentary. It's online. It's on YouTube. So I know because we started early. It's posted on Ahmed's page. Just click on it and watch it. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for coming.
all you on your way out didn't know that the film auditorium in Fillmore used to be run by a black man named Bill Graham.
Yeah.
I mean Sullivan. Sullivan was the one employed Bill Graham, and that's how it became famous. When blacks couldn't stay at the hotel downtown, they used to stay in Fillmore. We used to perform there back